The deadliest ultramarathon disaster. That's how the horrific events of May 22, 2021, in the Yellow River Stone Forest in Gansu, northern China, are remembered. On that day, out of 172 participants, 21 runners lost their lives. So, what exactly killed people in a regular running competition? As always, viewer discretion is advised. May 21st, 8 p.m. Technical meeting. As always, the organizers were concerned about whether the runners would face extreme heat and the risks of heat stroke. This was no ordinary marathon. It was a cross-country race, which is already very challenging. Participants had to run through hilly forest terrain. This marathon had been held for 4 years, with a different route each time. In 2021, the 100-kilometer trail wound along Mihiyashin Hill. The start and finish points were set in picturesque locations, with a large loop through the mountains. Marathoners began at an elevation of 1,595 meters, while the peak at the third checkpoint reached 2,230 meters. Participants had 20 hours to complete the route, expecting to spend a night on the trail and then continue the race. So, organizers needed to ensure that the already tough challenge wouldn't be worsened by the weather conditions. The Jingtai County Meteorological Bureau forecast strong gusty winds, sandstorms, a temperature drop, and hail in Gansu province. This upset the organizers because the marathon was crucial for the province. Additionally, other sources did not confirm the temperature drop information, so the organizers did not postpone the race date. Meanwhile, participant Chen Hui eagerly awaited the morning. He was supposed to participate in a different marathon, but it was canceled due to an epidemic in the city. Then, Chen learned that someone had dropped out of the Gansu race, and he could take the vacant spot. Hui had already participated in 3 cross-country races, but this was his first attempt at the 100-kilometer distance. So he gladly accepted the challenge without questioning why people had dropped out at the last minute. 7 a.m. Chen woke up and began preparing for the race. Like the other participants, organizers, and reporters, about an hour later, a photographer noticed through their lens that the weather was indeed worsening, and rain clouds were slowly moving in their direction. In nearby villages, the wind had already picked up, and the temperature started to drop steadily by 1 degree per hour. However, at this time, in the geopark where the race was taking place, the sun was still shining, and the runners waiting at the start didn't suspect that rain was about to hit the mountains. But Chen wasn't thinking about the rain. He was more worried about heat stroke, so he wore compression pants under his shorts and a short-sleeve shirt, along with arm sleeves for UV protection. At 9 a.m., a gunshot signaled the start, and the participants took off. Suddenly, the wind blew off runners' caps and hats. It looked amusing from the outside, but this was the first sign hinting at the worsening weather that would later become fatal for them. 10:40 a.m. Chen Hui had already passed the canyon and was heading to the second checkpoint. But around 11 a.m., the rain began. Chen had already reached the second checkpoint and continued to the third despite the worsening weather. This was the most challenging section of the race, with an almost 1,000-meter climb up the mountain. Directional signs, tied to rocks earlier, were scattered by the wind. Strong gusts knocked runners off their feet and chilled them. Additionally, in the mountains, the rain that had started earlier became increasingly intense and soon turned into hail. At this moment, Chen saw other participants turning back. The weather at the peak became unbearable, so the participants headed back. But the return journey would still take considerable time. Finishing was out of the question. Others advised Chen to turn back with them. However, he decided to try to continue, hoping the weather would change quickly. But soon, he could neither run nor even stand as his legs began to cramp. The rain intensified, and he decided to find shelter. Hui had an emergency blanket, which he wrapped around himself to shield himself from the rain. But the wind tore it apart instantly. Chen hurried back, and now he was the one who warned the runners he met on the way that they should return, but no one listened. Meanwhile, the organizers hesitated to stop the event until the last moment. But at 12:17 p.m., the first message asking for help appeared in the marathon group chat. There was no more time to waste, and the coordinators gathered 20 rescuers who immediately set out on the mountain trail to save the runners. However, this should have been done much earlier. Chen Hui was suffering from leg pain and frantically sought shelter from the relentless rain. Around 1 p.m., he stumbled upon a small stone house by the roadside. A soldier stood nearby, nervously shouting into a radio that they needed backup. Chen realized that, aside from this man, he hadn't seen anyone responsible for the participants' safety on the marathon route. Inside the house, 4 people huddled together, shivering from the cold. More and more marathoners began to crowd into the stone structure, and soon, over 40 participants were crammed together, covered with silver thermal blankets, in this small 30 square meter space. I used to think that dying from hypothermia was something that happened only on the snowy slopes on Everest. However, freezing to death can happen even on low mountains in warm weather if caught by cold winds and rain. Typically, the golden hour for rescue was about 30 minutes. The runners who had climbed the mountain were in real trouble. The cold wind paralyzed them, causing them to collapse right on the slopes. Their consciousness is clouded in this near-death state, leaving them unable to help themselves. Chen Hui saw rescuers bring in 2 more victims. These marathoners looked terrible, and people immediately rushed to help them. Some participants helped the frozen ones sit down. Others tried to feed them, but the victims couldn't even unclench their jaws from the cold. They didn't respond to pleas to eat anything. The poor souls didn't even react to their names, and their eyes were unfocused. It took a while for them to finally come to their senses. Chen had no idea that even more horrific things were happening outside the small house he was fortunate to find. 1:32 p.m. Local shepherd Zhu Kemming, a resident of the nearby village of Changsheng, was also caught in the rain and immediately ran to a cave he had once set up to shelter from bad weather while herding cattle. The cave was located between the 2nd and 3rd checkpoints on the marathon route, at an elevation of about 2,200 meters. Near the entrance, Zhu saw a man in a summer t-shirt, crossing his arms over his chest to stay warm. This was a marathon participant seeking refuge. He complained to Zhu about leg cramps, and Zhu quickly led him inside. Soon, 4 more people found the cave. Zhu immediately started a fire with a small amount of wood and old books he had left there. It became a bit warmer. The runners told Zhu that many people were still trapped by the bad weather on the mountain, collapsing and freezing on the slopes. Upon hearing this, Zhu set out to find them with a runner who had warmed up and put on clothes Zhu had also left in the cave. Amid the mountain ridge, they found a man lying on his stomach, clutching a thermal blanket. Together, they carried him to the cave. Moreover, Wang Qinlin, the party secretary of Humashui village, quickly organized over 20 villagers to take blankets, buns, and water to the runners in the cave upon learning of the incident. 6 people were saved, but many runners still needed help. 2 p.m. The event organizers suspended the race and called for additional rescue teams equipped with drones, thermal imagers, and radar detectors. Meanwhile, at Checkpoint 4, photographers and support staff were already waiting for the runners. They had prepared hot beef soup, but didn't understand why the participants hadn't arrived yet. Photographers and 3 rescue team members on duty at the checkpoint went into the mountains to check the situation. At 2:37 p.m., they encountered the first runner. This participant had mild hypothermia as he was wearing a coat given to him by a colleague. He also mentioned the blown-away signs, getting lost, and barely finding the route thanks to an offline map, since there was no internet in the mountains. But the most crucial information was that many participants on the mountain were suffering from the cold and rain and couldn't descend on their own. This information was relayed to the organizers. By 3 p.m., everyone in the area was mobilized to rescue the runners. They found the victims, dressed them in warm clothes, and helped them walk. However, not all the found runners needed help. Some had already frozen to death. Around 5 p.m., a bus brought Chen Hui and other runners from the small house to the foot of the mountain. Chen thought the other participants had safely waited out the bad weather, so he filmed the surrounding landscapes and edited a video about his marathon experience with cheerful music. Around 7 p.m., he posted the video online. Suddenly, notifications started blowing up Chen's phone. Many people harshly criticized him in the comments, calling him insensitive. But Chen didn't understand why everyone was so upset about a lighthearted video about the Gansu event, and why they were cursing him. He started scrolling through the news and was horrified to see that the world had been watching the rescue operation and learning about the fatalities for hours. As of 6 p.m., 139 athletes had been brought to safety, while 33 were still missing. Around 7 p.m., firefighters arrived at the 4th checkpoint to find the remaining runners. If help had arrived earlier, maybe the marathon wouldn't have turned into such hell. Meanwhile, photographers were taken from the route by car to be driven to a hotel. But then, information came about another runner still on the course nearby. The car went to meet her. At 8:20 p.m., 68 kilometers from the starting point, they encountered a female athlete and picked her up to take her to safety. To their surprise, she burst into tears because they had interrupted her journey to the finish line and her chance to win the marathon. She was unaware of the unfolding tragedy, but they quickly informed her about the events on the route. At 9 p.m., the temperature in the mountains dropped to 1 degree. Rescuers and volunteers continued combing the hillside near the Yellow River shore. The task now was not to save everyone, but to help those showing signs of life. The locals were more effective in the rescue efforts since they knew the terrain well. By midnight, there were 720 rescuers on the mountain. They found 4 more runners in the Shepherd's Cave. However, due to the delay in aid, the shelter didn't save them from hypothermia. Only one of them was alive. The last person rescued was a severely injured 60-year-old runner. June 23rd. 6 a.m. Chen Hui woke up and turned on his phone. People were still sending him news about the increasing number of bodies found on the mountain. At 9:30 a.m., rescuers discovered the last missing person, but she showed no signs of life. Of the 172 participants, 151 survived. Almost all suffered from frostbite of various stages, and 21 people passed away in this fatal marathon. So, who was responsible for these deaths? It seemed logical to blame the organizers who ignored the weather forecast and made a series of mistakes. Authorities began a haste investigation into the tragedy. China did not want the tragic events in Gansu to dominate the headlines and overshadowed the grand celebration of the Communist Party's centenary. Li Choubi, the secretary of the Jingtai County, where the marathon took place, was summoned for questioning. It was believed that he would bear the responsibility. Soon, news broke that he had jumped from a high-rise building and died. Following this, 27 officials received administrative warnings and notices of dismissal, and Li was dismissed posthumously. May 21st, the evening before the marathon, Chen Hui checked the weather forecast. It said that the next day would be cloudy and windy. However, like probably most of the registered runners, he didn't take it seriously, assuming that the organizers knew best how dangerous it was and that he could rely on them. Write in the comments if you have ever decided not to go somewhere at the last minute and it saved your life. Also, subscribe to my channel for many real-life stories that are hard to believe.